We've got the Giants going to Philadelphia to play the Eagles on Saturday night in a divisional game in the divisional round. Who do you think is going to come out on top and why?
So I've been debating this game internally for days, like literally arguing with myself, talking about it, looking up numbers, trying to figure out a reason to make a definitive decision. And I think I've come to the conclusion. I think the Giants are going to upset the Eagles. It's a bold statement. A lot of people think I'm crazy. People think that oh, they beat the Vikings. They're not that impressive. Listen, I said this last week, as did NFL Network apparently today or yesterday. Taking my damn content. I see what you're doing. I think the Giants are making a statement. I think the Giants are getting hot at the right time. I think the Eagles ended the season on a bad note with how they performed against the Giants. And with that week of rest, that could provide to be an X factor in and of itself because they could have a little bit of rust. They could start off a little bit slow. I mean, Lane Johnson is playing the right tackle for the Eagles, but he's not 100%. I think that they dial up some blitz packages, stack up that right side, make him have to work for it. And if they pressure Jalen Hurts, who we already know is limited with that shoulder, we don't know how effective he's going to be. I think that that's going to pose a big issue because if he's not able to get into a rhythm, and by he, I mean Jalen Hurts, with the RPO, if the run game cannot be established, I think that this offense is going to have to lean on Jalen Hurts to make every single throw and every single play. And with him being injured, the offensive line not being 100%, that could pose to be an issue. I understand that Minnesota had the league's worst offensive line, if not one of them, and the Eagles statistically have one of the better offensive lines. But as of recency, the Eagles' offensive line has not played well. Gardner Minshew was under pressure in both games he started. Jalen Hurts was under pressure against the Giants as well. If Lane Johnson is at 75%, 80%, that is still going to be a weakened offensive tackle on that right side that has obviously been the most reliable tackle, arguably in football over the course of the last 8 to 10 years, however long Lane's been in the league. That's going to be a problem. They're going to line up Kayvon Thibodeau out there. They're going to put pressure on the inside with Leonard Williams and, of course, Dexter Lawrence. We know that the corners for the Giants played up against Minnesota when they needed to because Adoree Jackson did what he needed to do, as well as the other corners that support him to contain Justin Jefferson. We all know that Justin Jefferson is better than A.J. Brown, but in terms of physicality, that jump ball may not be as easy, or excuse me, as difficult as it was because A.J. Brown is just a dominant force out there in one-on-one coverage. If this Giants defense can find a way to create 3-and-outs and pressure on Jalen Hurts, I think with the Eagles' lack of rush defense between Daniel Jones being mobile and Saquon Barkley, for whatever reason, being on an absolute mission, I think that they eat up the time of possession in this game because you cannot dial back and have Daniel Jones throw the ball almost 40 times against the arguably the best secondary in football with Bradbury, Slay, if Gardner Johnson is available for this game, and so on and so forth. The linebackers in this game are going to be critical as well because you are going to see Daniel Jones rely on the tight end in the middle of the field. As they love to play man coverage, you're going to have to run a lot of misdirection routes. I mean, a lot of crossers, a lot of slants. You're going to have to make these linebackers cover. And we all know that Isaiah Hodgins showed out in Minnesota last week. But again, Minnesota's defense is not the Eagles' defense. I will switch it to Philly on how Philly is going to win. Philly has to take advantage and get Jalen Hurts into that rhythm. Get him into a couple of easy throws. Let him get comfortable. Let him feel like he's back in some kind of a groove. Get A.J. Brown his targets to get him involved. And then, of course, as the double team approaches, which we all know that it will, you got to start attacking other receivers. He sometimes becomes one-dimensional and he starts to feed A.J. too much. Then you start to lose track of Dallas Goedert. You start to forget that you also have the availability of Quez Watkins and the vertical threat. And then, of course, you have Devontae Smith. We all know he's probably one of the better route runners in the league. So they have to take advantage and distribute this ball evenly, and you have to run the ball with Miles Sanders. You cannot just have Jalen, similar to what I said about Daniel, you cannot have him drop back and throw that ball 40 times. You need to get him into a groove, and you cannot also have him putting himself out there with that shoulder injury with the consistent RPO, quarterback sneaks, draws, whatever it is that Sirianni likes to dial up. You have to be cautious because I know it's the playoffs and it's win or go home. If he gets hurt in that first half, that first quarter, that first drive, you're done. Your hopes and dreams are gone with Jalen Hurts. I'm not saying it's going to be a blowout. I think this game is going to come down to the absolute wire. We have seen New York do this before, especially in 2007. They went to Dallas. They beat the number one seed. Ironically enough, it's a divisional opponent again at this point. We've seen Daniel Jones make big plays when need be, and Saquon Barkley is that guy. If they keep the ball away from that offense, if that defense can pressure the quarterback, I think that Philadelphia gets upset because they're just not ready for it. We've seen them play down to certain opponents. We've seen them lose to teams they shouldn't have lost to. Especially with this week off, it could help or hinder them. And in this case, I think it's going to give them a little bit of rust. Daniel's going to get into a hot start. And I think that the Giants are going to move on to the NFC Championship.
Yeah, I feel kind of the same way. I was kind of split about this game simply just because it is a divisional game. And seeing how the Giants played against the Vikings last week, they were impressive, especially from an offensive perspective, because the Vikings, granted, they have one of the worst defenses in the NFL. They couldn't find an answer to slow down that Giants offense. And, the Giants are putting up 30 plus points against you when you're the home team. That's a bad look for the Vikings. But I'm actually going to go the opposite way here. I am going to pick the Eagles. Very similar to how you outlined. It's going to be a very competitive game. Typically, when we see these divisional games, I'm not talking about the divisional round. I'm just talking about where two teams from the same division have played each other in the playoffs this year. They've been very competitive. We had the Bengals and the Ravens last week, went down to the wire. The Bills and the Dolphins last week. That was a crazy shootout game. I think with this one, it's going to be competitive like those other games, but I still am going to favor the Eagles simply just because I think they have some advantages over the Giants, and I don't think the Giants are going to be as successful against the Eagles as a whole as they were last week to the Vikings. So I'm going with the Eagles simply because I just have more faith that the Eagles are going to be able to establish consistency on the offensive side of the ball like the Vikings were able to do against the Giants last week. But the biggest thing for me is the Eagles defense is going to play miles better than what the Vikings were last week. Like I already said, the Vikings have one of the worst defenses in the NFL. When it comes to the Eagles have a much better defense. And I think overall, they will do a much better job to be able to contain this Giants offense that did put up 30 plus last week. My biggest thing when it comes to the Eagles defense is I think their game plan is going to be very simple. Stack the box, contain Saquon Barkley, and force Daniel Jones to beat you. And granted, I will give Daniel Jones credit. He went on the road last week and proved to be the quarterback that honestly hasn't really shown me to be up until this point in his career. He went on the road, he played A+ football and made the plays that needed to be made. When you compare that to the rest of his career up to this point, he hasn't really done that consistently. So I'll give him credit there. But going up against the Eagles and that defense on the road with that hostile environment that Philly brings game in and game out with their fans, I think it's going to be a much more pressurized situation for Daniel Jones. And I think there's a potential that he's going to slip up in this game. I'm not saying he's going to be the sole reason why the Giants lose this game. He may have a turnover in this game, and it could prove to be a significant one that could really swing the momentum in Philly's favor. So my thing is, if the Eagles are going to be smart defensively, stack the box, contain Saquon, because that Giants offense, when they're running and gunning, it's usually because Saquon is that primary factor for their offense. And when he's ripping off 10 to 15 yards a chunk, like he was against the Vikings last week, that's a tough offense to stop, especially the way that they use Daniel Jones in that RPO style offense. So Eagles defense has a very clear agenda as far as I'm concerned going with this game plan. When it comes to the Eagles and their offense, they have to reestablish some rhythm, especially knowing how that last game of the regular season played out against the Giants. They didn't look good. Jalen, that was his first game back after sustaining, I think it was a shoulder injury a couple weeks prior, and he definitely looked rusty. He just looked like the offense was out of sorts. The timing was off. And hopefully that this past week off, since they had the number one seed in the NFC, they'll be in a better position to be able to go out and essentially attack this Giants defense, which I will say this about the Giants defense. When they actually go up against a decent offense, they have actually been known to struggle. The fact that they gave up 24 points to the Vikings last week, and the Vikings have a pretty good offense, that was a little bit of a cause of concern for me because I didn't think that the Vikings, albeit they did lose that game, they were able to march up and down on the field for like 75 to 80% of the game. So that game ended up being a lot more of a shootout than I think people anticipated, just because that Giants defense has been stingy this year. But I think this is one of those games where I think that Giants defense could step up to make this game a lower scoring game than what we saw last week. But I still believe that this Eagles offense has the requisite pieces to go out there and get some decent drives, and not just drives to get field goals on the board. I'm talking about touchdowns. And that really is the name of the game here. And I think that Jalen Hurts is going to be able to connect with A.J. Brown on a consistent basis. The same goes with Devontae Smith. I wouldn't be surprised if they take some deep shots with Quez Watkins because, like you said, Kev, he is really their vertical threat on that offense, and he could take the top off of a defense because he can burn past some corners and some safeties when matched up one-on-one against them. So, and also just to kind of talk about the run game, I think when their run game is effective with the Eagles, they're a tough offense to stop. I simply just because very similar to what Daniel Jones and Saquon run with the Giants offense, the Eagles can run it with Jalen Hurts and Miles Sanders. And I think that's also going to be a big point of emphasis as well. They need to run the ball effectively to get the Giants into a situation where they don't really know what to expect. Because if both Jalen is good in the passing game and the running back committee is effective in the run game, that's going to be a tough formula for the Giants to stop. So overall, I just favor the Eagles to be a little bit more effective in their decision making in this game compared to the Giants. I think they just have a better overall chance to win this game, albeit in a very close one, and advance to the NFC Championship game. So going with the Eagles, I'm going to say they win this one by about, I'm going to say like 4 points. I think it's going to be a very close game. It's going to be a fun game. I'm really anticipating this game to be one of the best games of the weekend. But I'm going to say that the Eagles win this one by the score of 24-20. They advance to the NFC Championship game where they'll play eventually either the Cowboys or the 49ers. And I think that will set up a pretty solid NFC Championship as far as I see it. But I got the Eagles in this one, and they will advance.